By full dark, the blackened ribracks leaned steaming at the fires, and there was a jousting over the coals with shaven sticks whereon were skewered gobs of meat, and a clank of canteens and endless raillery. And sleep that night on the cold plains of a foreign land, 46 men wrapped in their blankets under the self-same stars. The prairie wolves so like in their yammering, yet all about so changed and strange. They caught up and set out each day in the dark before the day yet was, and they ate cold meat and biscuit and made no fire. The sun rose on a column already ragged these 6 days out. Among their clothes there was small agreement, and among their hats less. The little painted horses stepped shifty and truculent, and a vicious snarl of flies fought constantly in the bed of the game wagon. The dust of the party raised was quickly dispersed and lost in the immensity of that landscape, and there was no dust other for the pale sutler, who pursued them drives unseen, and his lean horse and his lean cart leave no track upon such ground, or any ground. By 1,000 fires in the iron blue dusk he keeps his commissary, and he's a wry and grinning tradesman, good to follow every campaign, or hound men from their holes in just those whited regions where they've gone to hide from God. On this day 2 men fell sick, and 1 died before dark. In the morning there was another ill to take his place. The 2 of them were laid among sacks of beans and rice and coffee in the supply wagon, with blankets over them to keep them from the sun. And they rode with the slamming and jarring of the wagon, half shearing the meat from their bones, so they cried out to be left. And then they died. The men turned out in the early morning darkness to dig their graves with the blade bones of antelope, and they covered them with stones and rode on again. They rode on, and the sun in the east flushed pale streaks of light, and then a deeper run of color, like blood seeping up in sudden reaches, flaring planewise, and where the earth drained up into the sky at the edge of creation, the top of the sun rose out of nothing, like the head of a great red phallus, until it cleared the unseen rim and sat squat and pulsing and malevolent behind them. The shadows of the smallest stones lay like pencil lines across the sand, and the shapes of the men and their mounts advanced elongate before them like strands of the night from which they'd ridden, like tentacles to bind them to the darkness yet to come. They rode with their heads down, faceless under their hats, like an army asleep on the march. By mid-morning another man had died, and they lifted him from the wagon where he'd stained the sacks he'd lain among, and buried him also, and rode on. Now wolves came to follow them, great pale lobos with yellow eyes that trotted neat of foot or squatted in the shimmering heat to watch them where they made their noon halt. Moving on again, loping, sidling, ambling with their long noses to the ground. In the evening their eyes shifted and winked out there on the edge of the firelight, and in the morning when the riders rode out in the cool dark, they could hear the snarling and the pop of their mouths behind them as they sacked the camp for meat scraps. The wagons drew so dry they slouched from side to side like dogs, and the sand was grinding them away. The wheels shrank, and the spokes reeled in their hubs and clattered like loom shafts, and at night They'd drive false spokes into the mortises and tie them down with strips of green hide, and they'd drive wedges between the iron of the tires and the sun-cracked felloes. They wobbled on. The trace of their untrue labors like sidewinder tracks in the sand. The deledge pegs worked loose and dropped behind. Wheels began to break up. 10 days out, with 4 men dead, they started out across a plain of pure pumice, where there grew no shrub, no weed, far as the eye could see. The captain called a halt, and he called up the Mexican who served as a guide. They talked, and the Mexican gestured, and the captain gestured, and after a while they moved on again. "This looks like the high road to hell to me," said a man from the ranks. "What does he reckon for the horses to eat?" "I believe they're supposed to just grit up on the sand like chickens and be ready for the shelled corn when it does come." In 2 days they began to come upon bones and cast off apparel. They saw half-buried skeletons of mules with the bones so white and polished they seemed incandescent even in that blazing heat. And they saw panniers and pack saddles and the bones of men, and they saw a mule entire, the dried and blackened carcass hard as iron. They rode on. The white noon saw them through the waste like a ghost army. So pale they were with dust like shades of figures erased upon a board. The wolves loped paler yet, and grouped and skittered and lifted their lean snouts on the air. At night the horses were fed by hand from sacks of meal and watered from buckets. There was no more sickness. The survivors lay quietly in that cratered void and watched the white-hot stars go rifling down the dark, or slept with their alien hearts beating in the sand like pilgrims exhausted upon the face of the planet Anareta, clutched to a namelessness wheeling in the night.